Welcome to Unity Now, a podcast where we discuss all things Unity 2020. This is part 2 of a segment called The Candidate Debate, discussion centered around potential nominations for candidates on the 2020 ticket. We're recording this episode on Sunday, August 16th, so by the time you're listening to this or watching this, we may be well along in the process of nominations, which are happening soon. Unity 2020, for those of you joining us for the first time, is a movement that stems from an unprecedented proposal, namely that we the people draft 2 candidates, one from the center left and one from the center right, and then once elected, they agree to govern as a team, and all decisions and appointments will be made jointly in the interest of the American public. The candidates have to satisfy 3 overarching criteria. 1, they must be patriotic. 2, they must be highly capable. And 3, they must be courageous. My guests today are members of the Unity 2020 campaign management team. They're here to discuss their own thoughts about candidates who may potentially fulfill these 3 criteria. And before we bring them on, I just want to let you know that you can find out more about Unity 2020, including how and when we will select candidates, which is happening very soon, as I mentioned, and how you can help by visiting the website, articlesofunity.org. Our guests today are Joe Hoke and Jeffrey Rubin. Joe's going to talk to us about Dan Crenshaw and why he believes Crenshaw, who would be representing the center-right part of the ticket, would fulfill the Unity 2020 criteria. Jeffrey will talk to us about Lawrence Lessig, who he believes would be our best bet to represent the center-left side of the ticket. And we aren't necessarily suggesting that their 2 candidates run on the same ticket, so time permitting, we'll see if there's any dialectic debate about each of their respective selections and who would or would not be fit to run. Without further ado, Jeffrey Rubin, Joe Hoke, thank you for joining me today, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me.
You know what, Joe? I asked you at the top of our conversation before we started recording how to pronounce your last name, and I fear that escaped me and that I ruined it.
No, you got it. Hoke.
Oh,
How with a K. Yep.
All right, Toby, cut all that out. Let's meet the panelists here. Jeffrey, why don't we start with you before we even get to talking? Tell people a little bit about who you are and where you're from and what your basis is for being so involved in the movement, generally speaking. Then we can get to candidates after that.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to summarize that. So I'm broadcasting from Rochester, Minnesota right now, which is about an hour and a half south of the Twin Cities. I'm currently getting my PhD training in biomedical sciences, so professionally not involved in politics at all. And so I guess a little bit of my own personal politics, which aren't super significant, but so I've always voted left since I was 18. I voted for Barack Obama twice in 2008 and 2012. And in 2016, I was in the Bernie camp. And I think that was when things really took a turn for me personally. That was when I really began to see, I guess, the political machine of the U.S. kind of take its mask off. And it was getting very, very obvious at that point that something was wrong. And by the time I was voting for Hillary Clinton in 2016, it was a choice between 2 people that I thought really had no good ability to run the country. And now we're up to 2020 and the same thing is kind of happening again. So, I mean, it seems like it's getting worse every 4 years. That's my perspective. And that's really brought me to this point where I'm seeing that not only are the candidates not good, but the American people aren't really the ones that are putting input into who the candidates are. And I think that's the big problem driving this.
Joe, turn it to you. We'll offer people a little bit of background about you and what brought you into the movement.
I'm sorry, I forgot your name, buddy.
Jeff.
Jeff, I do not have a job that centers around politics. I am from Central Valley, California, where is kind of like the Bible Belt of California, a very Republican area. I grew up Republican, conservative, and voted for McCain, in 2008. And then within that course of 4 years, I slowly trickled over slower to the left. just noticing a lot of propaganda type stuff that was happening on, Fox News stuff that I was watching more. And then, so I kind of went over to the other side, and then lo and behold, I kind of found the same problems creeping up on the left as well. So I was kind of running away from things, not knowing what I was searching for, but knowing what I was running away from. And then finally, I just kind of threw up my hands and said that, party system is probably not the best route to go, And when I first heard about Unity 2020, I was very excited about it. I thought the whole scheme was just very well thought out, and it's just a mechanism where everybody has a seat at the table. So, the opposite side isn't trying to sabotage the other. I think that's my main reason why I really like Unity 2020 is just everybody's going to be there, at the table. So it's a little harder to throw mud, when you got the same person on your team, and but yeah, for my profession, I used to be a high school English teacher. Now I'm got out of that, thankfully, right before COVID, but or not right before, but I've been a real estate agent for a while. So my job isn't centered around politics, but I'm just interested in a lot of the subjects. I first heard Brett Weinstein when the Evergreen stuff happened, and I just absolutely kind of just got enamored by the way he presented himself. I think the first time I saw him was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and I've just been kind of hooked ever since. With Eric as well, Sam Harris, a lot of probably progressive leaning podcasts, but seemingly like they're trying to, they're hated from all angles is what it seems like. And that's, I don't know if I'm just a contrarian and I kind of, gravitate towards that, but it seems like they're just a group of people that are speaking genuine, and that's just a thing that I feel like is really lacking in a lot of ways, in politics in general.
Fair enough. And since you have a little momentum, and because you just mentioned something that I'm interested in, I think a lot of people I've talked to in this movement consider themselves something of contrarians, or just people who they can't stomach what they're. Jeff mentioned earlier that things are getting worse and worse, and I either hear people say that things are getting worse and worse, or that they're getting wiser and wiser, and things are the same, or maybe that those two aren't mutually exclusive. But interestingly enough, someone who you feel is ripe for the picking in terms of a center-right candidate who would satisfy the criteria that we've set forth for what it means to be a candidate is somebody who's currently acting in government right now, Dan Crenshaw. So I would like to start with you and see what your thoughts are there and your basis for choosing him.
Just cards on the table, Dan Crenshaw, I think, would be a great candidate, but he is not my, steadfast guy. I think because he's already in politics gives a lot of clout to him in a lot of regard, and that would be a big focal point there. That he's a veteran, just like Tulsi Gabbard as well. My other, I'm jumping the gun there, but
no, that's okay. That's okay. You can mention whatever you want.
But Dan's got great character. I mean, I think like. What really we're lacking above everything above, I can't really say that I know all of his policy or all of his positions on stuff, but I can tell, at least, from my perception, that he's a genuine human being that is trying to, to do the best that he can, that what he thinks is best for the people, and he's not an ideologue, and I don't even think that Trump or Biden is an ideologue. I think they're just the people that like positions of power, like they don't really have a set agenda other than, self-aggrandizement or, things like that. And I think that Dan Crenshaw is a person that would handle that position with a lot more, with a lot more character and dignity, and that's what I think is lacking. I mean, and from the people that I live around that are very conservative and never going to not be conservative, a lot of them that don't like Trump, still they what they're lacking, what they don't like the most about him is just his demeanor and his character. So if we can just get somebody in there that's a little bit different than that, then I think that would go a long way for at least where I live.
You just sort of tipped your hand a little bit there, but maybe we should bring this to a meta level. And I'll say that we intended this interview to be 3 or 4 people. So we were going to, for time's sake, limit the conversation to speaking about one of the choices for one of the nominees for each person. But there is some sensibility to talking about both of your respective choices, because one thing that's special about the proposal of this movement is that there's a balance in place. So, like you said, Dan Crenshaw's, if you were to be asked politics, who should be running everything, you may not say Crenshaw, but with the context of there are 2 people who are willing to engage in dialectic and problem solving, it sounds like you'd be up for Crenshaw and Tulsi Gabbard. And one of the reasons for believing that, and correct me if I'm just getting too, if I'm psychoanalyzing or something like that, but it sounds like one of the reasons for you're believing that is because both are patriotic, they've served our country, and both, let's just say, can cut through bullshit. Maybe they're people who are in government, but who you've seen them demonstrate that they can cut through BS on both sides. Yeah,
absolutely. And like what Brett kind of harps on a lot, which I think is very important, where from what I can see, like they don't speak in bad faith, like what they're, you know, if they have opposing opinions, which I'm sure they both will, eventually in a 4-year presidency, like they won't, they'll at least communicate in good faith. And that's, it goes a long way, just that.
Jeff, I'm really interested in your pick because you're the first person I've talked to who seems to have a deep reasoning behind why you chose somebody who's not in politics. I suppose he had a presidential run or a quasi-presidential run at some point. But you picked Lawrence Lessig. So just talk about him for people who don't know. I bet there will be a lot of people who don't know him. And your basis for selecting him.
Yeah, well, it is kind of interesting as a starting point that many people in Unity 2020 may not have heard of Lawrence Lessig. And it's kind of crazy how you can get lost in the sands of time over the course of 4 years, but I guess that would be what happened. So Lawrence Lessig did have a Democratic presidential primary campaign in 2015. And that was when he first, as far as I'm aware, entered into the political arena as a contestant. So just to back up a little bit, I mean, Lawrence Lessig is a professor of law at Harvard Law School. He was previously associated with Stanford University and also with University of Chicago. And going back before that, I mean, he does have a stellar education record, and he's fought many cases or been involved as an attorney. But what he's really been focusing on for the past decade of his career are 2 areas, which are campaign finance reform and electoral reform. And what I would recommend anyone listening to this to do is, go on YouTube, search Lawrence Lessig, but what you'll find are 2 TED Talks that are about 20 minutes each. And I think those 2 talks really encapsulate what his views are and his views on how to solve our current political problems. So what he's been focusing on, if I had to summarize in one sentence, is the fact that such a small percentage of the people that live in the U.S. are responsible for picking the candidates that end up on party tickets. Whereas we can all kind of agree that it's one person, one vote system in the U.S. We'll all go to the voting booth in November and vote for one of 2 candidates, probably in a normal year, I should say. And the problem with that is that the 350 million people in the U.S. didn't have any input into who actually went under the ticket. That was decided by an extremely small number of people in the first place. So in my mind, and this is probably what Lawrence Lessig would say, you can't really call this a functioning democracy if there's, I don't know what he says, 0.0042% of the people in the country are the ones deciding who goes on the ticket. So that's kind of the basis of Lawrence Lessig's argument. And just in terms of, how I kind of came up with this pick for the Unity 2020 ticket, I really like Lawrence Lessig as a pick, not just for the views that I just summarized, but I also am a strong believer in that as a movement, as Unity 2020, we need to take some very pragmatic steps to make this whole thing work out. I mean, I joined the Slack work group that we're on, and that was my first criticism of Unity 2020, actually, is like, how are we going to get this going in 3.5 months? Like, what's the plan here, guys? So And actually I agree with what Joe was saying. So like one huge pragmatic benefit of Dan Crenshaw is he's already a politician. But to me, the idea of kind of roping someone into the unity movement who's not really interested in being a politician, that seems like too far of a reach for me. I think it's going to be much easier to get someone who's already shown that they're interested in the political arena to actually join this ticket. So that's another benefit of Lawrence Lessig. I mean, he did try to run for president. He gave it a serious attempt. And based on my recollection and what I've read, I would say he had similar issues to Yang and Gabbard that they were having in the last DNC primary, getting on the debate stage. And that's why he had to close his ticket out. Right. So he was almost like a prototype for what was going on. And I would say got a little bit more coverage in this last round than it did 4 years ago.
If I recall, you could probably correct me because I'm sure you've done more research and thinking about him than I have. But I think I remember that he had a unity vibe about the way that he began his candidacy, in that he sort of made a promise that if he were able to receive enough money in donations, that he would run. And then he honored that promise when he did receive those donations, whether or not he believed he would get them. So it sort of is this kind of, he did get sort of a groundswell interest from just the electorate. And then he did run. And then, as you say, he was given no speaking time, right? I don't think he could even get on televised debates.
I don't think so. And can I tack something on to what you just said? So this is really interesting when you're saying he was like prototype unity. One thing he was actually doing was, I guess I could say he was going to base his entire presidential platform around passing the Citizens Equality Act. And that was going to basically be the legislation for this campaign and electoral reform that I was talking about. But actually, when he initiated his presidential run, what he claimed he was going to do was get this legislation passed and then resign as president afterwards. So right. If that's not Unity 2020 vibes, I don't know what is, but it's super interesting that the way he proposed his presidential campaign was actually to give up his presidential seat to the VP after he got done what he thought he needed to.
Right. It's only fair, I suppose, since Joe, I asked him to go ahead and talk about the balance in his two choices. Do you have an idea about who you would like to see counterbalance Lessig on the center right? That's to you, Jeff.
Oh, sorry. I haven't thought...
Usually way to word it, sorry.
Yeah. I haven't thought too much about who in particular on the center right would be a good counterbalance for Lessig. And in fact, I'm not even sure that I believe in someone needing a great counterbalance from the left or the right for the Unity 2020 idea. I think that we need to get two capable, courageous, and patriotic people, one from both sides. And I think as long as they fit those criteria and they're a reasonable candidate, it could be anyone. But I'm not sure he needs some kind of balance, so to speak, in a particular person.
And Joe, I promise after this one to Jeff, I'm going to give to Jeff, I'll open the floor to you. But do you see, Jeff, any problems with the two choices Joe is setting forth? I mean, it sounds like you two are in agreement, philosophically at least, about what this, in some terms, what this movement is about and the kind of people that we would want to see in office. I suppose we all sort of have a vague agreement in that sense. But do you see anything wrong with having, or problematic about, I hate using the word problematic, that's sort of been hijacked, hasn't it? But would there be any difficulties seeing Dan Crenshaw running for president?
Is there anything toxic about my picks?
Anything toxic? That word has been hijacked also. I hear that too much. I don't think there's anything I would say that I take huge issue with Dan Crenshaw or Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, there are definitely certain aspects I like about both of them. They're both veterans. I think that's great. I saw a criticism of Dan Crenshaw in the past couple of months because his book came out earlier this year, and I saw a nice piece online about how his book is about being able to speak up against your party, but in his book he mentioned Trump's name like one time, so I thought that was kind of an interesting point, but that's all I really have to say about him, I think.
So, Joe, I think you both talked about having someone who's at least showing that they have willingness to be involved in politics as a vague criteria about, who would be actually practical and sensible to pick. Do you think that there would be anything difficult about having someone who's perhaps unknown as Lessig? That's Jeff was just saying. It's just interesting how quickly people can forget, or maybe we're never aware of someone like Lessig, who is really, we should be having thousands of people like him running all the time. There's so many brilliant people who have spent their lives studying, whether it's only one issue or series of issues, that are qualified to speak. But do you see that there would be any problems, let's just say at a marketing level, if that's the right way to say it, with someone like Lessig? And I don't mean to be leading. I wonder if you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is problems like with like Jocko and even The Rock kind of stuff too, where I think the main appeal is that, I mean, you're automatically, I mean, it's going to help. If I was thinking like Jocko or The Rock to like on a Tulsi Gabbard ticket, just to get all of the millions of eyeballs on there, because unlike any other candidate, regardless of their willingness to be a politician, like they're going to garner a lot of attention, and that's a real good selling point there, just for the unity ticket to be viable, But as far as, like if I'm living in a ideal unity 2020 ticket, I would rather have people that I know are politically minded, and not that I know that, that just have a good social influence that can be trusted, which is a great quality. And I would take that over, the two choices that we have right now, but yeah, I do see that, I mean, my main reason for going with Crenshaw and Tulsi is that they have, the war veterans, so they have like a certain kind of structure, a lot of people, just take that for, a certain level of respect and how they present themselves, but it's interesting though, like with at least with Tulsi, a lot of my far right conservative friends think that she's a crazy liberal or a closet liberal, or I mean a closet Antifa person, and they're like, I guess there was maybe some picture circulated years ago or something where she was, like in a group picture with some people of Antifa or something, and a lot of my friends won't let that go. But then all of what I hear from the left is that she's way too right, so she's kind of got like no home, anywhere she is, so I think maybe in that sense she's problematic, and I'm being idealistic, as her being maybe the best candidate. I think that if she was in that position, that she would do a fantastic job, but I don't know. I mean, maybe her playing John Lennon's Imagine kind of. Anybody see that? She was on a ukulele playing that. I mean,
I missed that.
Oh, that's good stuff. Also polarizing too. I mean, a lot of my conservative friends didn't like that for a possible president. But
the song "Imagine" has been hijacked to just like those words "toxic" and "problematic," hasn't it?
Right. Yeah. Pretty much everything is a little bit of a hot button right now. Yeah.
So I assume that we're taking into consideration when we're thinking about people who would be right for the job. There's this crazy, like Jeff mentioned, time element here that we just have to be honest about. We can think of this as something that is really time urgent and we must have it happen now. You could think a little bit deeper and say, let's act as though this is going to happen and hope something does. And if not, we can sort of ride this wave into the indefinite future. But let's just go with the former. Let's say that this is going to happen. What are the issues that you think Crenshaw would be particularly qualified to discuss and problem solve?
Well, I mean, anything foreign policy related. I mean, also with Tulsi Gabbard as well. I think they're good in foreign policy and understanding what it takes to have a functioning economy, inside and outside of our borders. I think that he just brings a lot of common sense to the table. That we're just lacking in a general sense. He speaks candidly, from what I can see. I didn't read all of his book. I've seen little excerpts and everything, and he's a poignant man, and I think he can rally a very quiet. I think almost a majority of conservatives that would like to have a person like him in the White House over somebody like Trump. his lack of divisiveness really is just a welcome thing to politics right now. I mean, I think he just in general he'd be really good.
I'm going to create a devil's advocate here, Jeff, even though I may not be aligned with this, but let's say that I had a problem with Lessig because maybe he is too hyper-focused on particular issues, which is a weird way to say this because in a way it's his focus is on something very broad and consequential, but maybe I think that Lessig doesn't have enough foreign policy experience, or there are going to be problems that arise that he's unable to think systematically enough to be able, or he's not going to have the background enough to be able to adequately address them. What would you say to somebody arguing for that persuasion?
Yeah, well, I would say, first of all, I think that's a valid argument. You could probably make a strong argument that if you're picking something like foreign policy, that might be one of Lessig's weaker points. And in fact, it's even hard to assess that because that's not something you'll find him discussing or speaking about over the course of what he's communicated over the past decade. However, actually, one point that Lessig does make over and over again very clear is this addresses exactly what you were just saying. So I think he actually says it anticipating that people will push back. He says, my issue isn't the biggest issue, but it is the first issue. And what he means by that is you're not going to get the legislation you want passed in DC right now because the politicians we have there aren't even representing what the people want. So right. This campaign finance reform and electoral reform, fixing that is going to be, I guess, the base of the tree that fixes all the things branching out from that afterwards. So that's his main argument and point is, and summarized well as I don't have the biggest issue, but I do have the first issue we need to solve.
That's a good point. I was talking to Alex Gould, somebody who works with us in the Unity movement, and he was talking about the way that the thing that appealed to him about the entire movement and proposal is that he was a Bernie guy. He voted for Bernie because he was the first to say what so many people were thinking. The system's rigged. Get out of here. And wow, there was a groundswell behind him, and it's someone who's calling it out. This could be possible. And then he said, then I watched Yang, and Yang was saying that there's a higher order problem here. System's rigged. At the same time, pretty soon, things are going to collapse on us if we don't do something because we can't, student debt is insane. People are going to be jobless. People are going to lose the sense of meaning or purposefulness in the future. So that's a higher order problem. And now he's listening to Brett, who he agrees is saying, sorry, I hate to even do this, but there's an even higher order problem that we can't talk about any of those things, the system being rigged or the problems that we're going to have even addressing the system being rigged, because we can't even talk to each other at the table to be able to discuss those problems in a way that would actually solve them. So it sounds like that's what attracts you to someone like Lessig, is that he just knows that the fundamental building blocks of being able to do any of this is that we need to be able to sit down and have a discussion that's representative of what people want and need.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what I think makes Lessig a great Unity candidate. I mean, Lessig was essentially a Cassandra for this entire thing that we're doing up to 10 years ago. I mean, he was seeing and diagnosing these issues, I think, before many of us were. That this Unity 2020 ticket, I mean, we can be frank and call it a last resort because that's kind of what it is. But I think if it were up to Lessig, he would have fixed a lot of the problems leading up to this a long time ago.
Joe, I don't know if you totally agree with everything I said, but to the extent that you don't, I'd be curious to know where you fall short of agreement, and to the extent that you do, I'd love it if you could talk about how you think someone like Crenshaw could bring about the kind of collaboration and representativeness, I don't know if that would be the right word, in order to start facilitating solving the problems that are on the table.
Yeah, I mean, Crenshaw, as well as any candidate, I think like what I'm liking that I'm hearing about Lessig is that campaign finance reform. I think they're just beholden by special interests so much that they aren't speaking for the people, because over half of their job is, and it's no real secret, is fundraising, is calling people, their bandwidth of their brains are by and large, geared towards winning the next election, for themselves, and it's a system that, I mean, and I don't have all the answers. Maybe, Lessig has some ideas on how to, do campaign finance reform. I think, just spitballing that they should have an allotted amount of money that like once candidates are determined, we should, as taxpayers, fund candidates and make that playing field as even as possible, where it's just not a purely, money game, and is what I'm seeing is it the everybody that pays the most money for their campaigns wins, and that doesn't seem like it speaks for the people. It speaks for, how much money you can invest in your campaign, not exactly what you're saying. So, I mean, if Crenshaw can do anything in that regard, and I think he has the character and speaking in good faith where that's something that he wouldn't dodge as far as admitting that that's a problem, that on both sides of the aisle, people are beholden to special interests, and whoever it is that is giving them money to be able to continue, doing the job that they're doing, I think if we can just get rid of the constant, looking over the shoulder of politicians to see, who's taking my spot, or, maybe have different, term stuff, to change up the trajectory of what people do in politics. But I think, getting money out of politics is a good step forward for that.
If you've talked about this kind of stuff enough, Joe, you probably have heard pushback on all sorts of different ideas, especially, like you said, you have friends and relatives who are deep ideologically for one camp or the other. What do you think people would push back on you for with respect to Crenshaw being a worthwhile representative of this movement?
Well, I mean, so far, people I've talked to, actually, even the conservatives don't really even know Crenshaw too well. I've had to introduce them to them, and that's why I was thinking for a second more about Jocko and The Rock, because a lot of people in my immediate circle, at least, they're, Dan Crenshaw is not a very visible politician. I think he has the potential to, thrust himself into that, spotlight and win a lot of people over. But right now, he doesn't have that going for him.
I'll admit something. I'm totally ignorant. Oh, sorry. Please go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that from what I've heard, even just, an hour ago, talking to my brother, who's, now on board with Unity 2020, he's just like, his big concern is who the candidates are. Why don't we have them yet? It's not even so much who they are, because a lot of them are like, okay, let's just, who are they though? It's not even so much, what they bring to the table, because it's almost by default that whoever we pick is going to be an improvement,
Yeah, that's why I did throw that question to Jeff, and why I'm questioning myself about the people who I believe could be representatives of the movement, is that, do we have time, the question being, do we have time to choose a candidate, one who is absolutely qualified, and then also introduce that candidate to the country, in rush order? That would be difficult. Joe, I wanted to just mention one thing. I was going to say that I be totally honest and plead ignorance about this, but I think about Crenshaw, and I don't really know much about him or where he stands in terms of policies. Mm-hmm. I've heard him. I know about his book. I know he's conservative. Beyond that, I really am not too sure. So I have this probably uninformed image in my mind of somebody who I don't trust. Maybe it's on an emotional level. I don't know. I don't trust to be the kind of person who would step back from his role in politics enough to be able to say, look, I'm going to go ahead and build my essence around saying that things are corrupt and we need to have conversations. Why are you confident that he might do so?
Well, I mean, his book is a good indicator that he's at least a contrarian towards a lot of status quo, I think. But yeah, that's actually a concern that I have too. Unlike Tulsi, that is pretty much made herself very clear that she doesn't mind being on that outside fringes and making enemies from both sides. Yeah, I mean, he is, but that's actually one of my better selling points for Dan Crenshaw is that he is kind of like more on the right, and maybe a little bit less unified as a candidate, but that's maybe going to garner a lot of votes from the right. That my biggest objection with McRaven, who I think would be a fantastic pick too, is that he's been so vocal about just in op-eds, whatever, in writing things about his disagreements with Donald Trump. That's going to just already kind of put him in a light that like, oh, well, he's just a never Trumper guy. Like he's not even a real conservative, or like he's turncoated, but he's trying to play that side. I don't think Dan Crenshaw at least has that aura around him yet. Where he's just like maybe pretending to be a conservative. So that's maybe a good selling point for him.
Both of you can jump on me about this if I'm misreading, but it does sound like, I don't know if this is temperamental or just the read that you each have about this movement. It seems like Jeff is willing to do some playing around, thinking about who truly is absolutely qualified for the movement, and he doesn't mind just dismissing or kind of leaving in the periphery what is completely practical in terms of marketing, campaigning. And Joe, it sounds like you're maybe, I wouldn't say detracting, but you're willing to choose somebody who you think will satisfy the requirements we're talking about, but maybe he wouldn't be your dream candidate if you had to, if you could wave a magic wand and say who's the most qualified person in the world, you wouldn't say Dan Crenshaw is the most qualified, but he might be the most qualified considering our time restrictions and what we would need to do to make him saleable.
Right, just in the most possibly palatable choice. Yeah, absolutely. If I'm being completely like in a perfect world where I have the one and only vote, my candidates would not be those two individuals, but I would lean closer towards this is probably going to but a Sam Harris, but I know that even his name is just very polarizing, and although I think that he speaks with a unifying demeanor and that he really tries to take things on a level playing field, and that by and large he speaks in good faith, he doesn't have that perception for a lot of Americans. I mean, like a and he's not even American, so it can't happen, So, but like a far left, far right, not far left, even far left, but in the perception of Americans, like Sam Harris on the left, Jordan Peterson on the right, like I would really like that kind of because I think they would definitely disagree on a lot of things, but they're open to communication. It would be an endlessly fascinating presidency,
Right.
And things would get done, I think.
So let's go there, Jeff. Maybe, I don't know how many people we're going to influence or who are going to see this or hear this, but maybe you could do your all to educate people about who Lawrence Lessig is in a little bit more depth and why he would be an ideal candidate for you. And by the way, correct me if any of my previous statements are actually off base and not representing what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, no, I think you got a pretty good grasp of my perspective. I mean, I could also take a step back from that and just say, I tell my friends about Unity 2020, and you guys could say if it's the same for you, but the main pushback I get is like, that's never going to happen. That's never going to work. Why are you wasting your time dealing with that movement kind of thing? So, I mean, that's a very defeating perspective to take. But, it's not the first time. That's what people were saying when I got behind Bernie in 2016, Andrew Yang in 2020. So, not my first rodeo with the defeating pushback from friends. But the one thing I can say about that is when I started getting involved in Unity 2020, I didn't always have a great way to retort to that. It's really hard to defend a movement when the movement doesn't have its leaders picked out yet. So in a certain sense, Unity is doing things backwards. So the way I would resolve that is, just get our ducks in a line, really prioritize getting figured out who the candidates are going to be, so that we can start saying more about them and more about what the movement's going to try to accomplish in November. So I guess I would just I would say that about it. That's why I think it's.
You're not so much of a dreamer that we can't be rational here, or we can't be practical. Yeah.
Sure. I guess I would just say that. I would reiterate what I had said earlier during this discussion, which is the further away you go from candidates that would probably already have been involved in politics in the first place, the further you're going to go from realistically getting them into office. And I think part of that has to do with us being less than 3 months away from election day. Realistically, we're going to accomplish a certain amount in a very short amount of time. So to me, it just makes more pragmatic sense to try to get people on the ticket that already have some notion of what it takes to really make it to the presidency.
Mm. Yeah. And on top of that, I wish that the unity movement had a little bit more foresight and or even more just pessimistic in knowing that the candidates that the DNC were going to pick were not going to be ones that we were going to be happy with. It seemed like we were kind of holding our breath a little bit to see, well, let's see what the ticket might be. And then once, Biden, came on and then Kamala, they're like, okay, now we really gotta, this is serious now kind of stuff. We should have probably known that, maybe a year ago, and starting this whole process a little sooner. That's really my main.
You could almost forgive anyone who wants to begin a movement of this sort for maybe, let's say, not seeing Trump make it, not seeing that Trump was going to be elected into office. But as soon as we realize that something like that is possible, that we have a populist leader, that the floor is really open for all sorts of possibilities that will probably only go downhill from there. So it would be nice if we had a nice 4-year planning period. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely.
Please. I keep cutting you guys off. I think we might have a little bit of lag time, so I'm not as rude as I might seem.
No, somebody else needs to get the floor.
Okay. Jeff, back to this is my original question to you, but then I wound up giving you a statement that I think you probably felt you had to defend a little bit, just intellectually. But can you tell people a little bit about a little bit more about Lessig and what you know about him? For instance, he had ideas about campaign finance reform, and even I think he had ideas about how to restructure the Electoral College. I don't think he ever said anything like we have to get rid of the Electoral College, but I think he had some way of reframing it or designing it differently that he thought would be appealing. And I don't know if you know anything he said about that, but when it comes to his main issues, what is it? What are his ideas?
Okay, so just jumping into that point, I believe he actually is in favor of abolishing the Electoral College, or at least breaking it down to some extent. So, there would be less of an Electoral College, I guess, less of states having to vote either blue or red all the way through, which is another relatively undemocratic practice, I think. So, one great example to answer your question is one thing he's in favor of, or at least an idea he's had that seems pretty viable to me, are what would be called campaign finance vouchers. So the idea behind these is, earlier in this discussion, I was mentioning what a small percent of the American population are actually responsible for getting certain people on the ticket that we're voting for. So that's done with money, and Lessig will say something like that's the money election. The election that comes before the general election is the money election. He phrases it something like that in his TED Talks, for example. So that's why it's so few people deciding, because it's so few people with the financial means to be able to do that. So the way a campaign finance voucher would work, and I believe that Andrew Yang would actually talk about this at some points too, as a more fair way to do things. Rather than people spending money, everyone would get a voucher. Every U.S. citizen would get a voucher and then be able to give that voucher to a candidate of their choice. And that would be where the funding comes from, not just out of people's pockets. So that would be a really, in my mind, simple and innovative way to fix this problem of so few financiers for the campaigns, which then end up deciding who goes on our tickets. That would distribute that choice to the U.S. citizen every U.S. citizen more broadly.
And I see this movement as being one of two things or both. One is you can imagine someone who has an idea like that, sort of like Yang had ideas, and that seems so sensible. And you say, well, if only we could implement something as sensible as this, then maybe we could take things in a positive direction. On the other hand, the other half of what we're looking for, I suppose, is that somebody who brings an idea to the table and hears pushback from somebody of opposition, whether it's political opposition or just temperamental or different ideas. Are they willing and able to, let's not even say compromise, but collaborate to make that a more fruitful decision for everybody? And do you think that would be so for Lessig?
The ability to create a system like that, is that what you're asking?
Would he collaborate if somebody pushed back on his idea for sensible reasons?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm putting words in his mouth at this point, but I think if he were able to, I guess we're all doing that a little bit. I think if he were able to push our system more towards his ideal, which I just framed, I think he would do that. I don't think he would be so idealistic about it as to not make any change just because he was having a disagreement about that change with someone else. And you were kind of more broadly asking about Lessig's history, right? That's how we opened this part of the discussion. So, interestingly, if you read about his history online, and that's how I know about Lessig, by reading online. I don't have a special connection to him. After he finished law school at Yale, he actually was a clerk for Antonin Scalia. So I found that a really interesting fact. I think if you read Wikipedia's page, it has some one-liner in there like that shows that Scalia chose Lessig for his brilliance and not for his partisan politics. I mean, I don't know how true that is, but nonetheless, he was able to work with one of the most conservative Supreme Court judges that we can all remember. So I think that says a lot about his ability to cross the aisle. And for all those that go and watch his TED Talks after this, he makes it very, very clear that this is not a partisan issue. The issues he's discussing are ones that affect Democrats, they affect Republicans. Maybe they affect both parties, each in a slightly different way, but it's by no means a one-sided thing. I mean, he just seems hyper aware of the fact that he needs to cross the aisle and other people need to be able to cross the aisle and have discussions about this to make progress.
Joe, what keeps you involved in this movement? I think all three of us have now mentioned that we have anxiety around this next election, and that also as we progress in this movement, we're anticipating that it maybe doesn't roll out the way that it's expected in perfect order, but yet we're all still here talking about it as though it can happen. What keeps you motivated, optimistic, and involved?
Well, with all of those kind of negatives stacked against us, there's just the idea that it's a group of people that are unified in this idea that there's a certain kind of politician that we expect out of our America, and we're lacking that. We're all starved of it, and this has been a way to honestly, I don't know anybody in my personal circle that has any awareness of Brett Weinstein or throughout me specifically telling them about it beforehand, kind of stuff. So it's kind of what gravitates me towards it is that I don't have a lot of like-minded people around me, and that it's just been very refreshing. I mean, like I just found the Slack forum 2 weeks ago when I posted my little Unity 2020 song thing. I just put it on the Unity 2020 Facebook page, and people showed me the Slack forum, and I was like, oh man, there's a whole community of people that are on board with this. And I know Brett has 200,000 subscribers plus now on his YouTube, but it just still feels like kind of like a hidden secret, that I want to get out there, that I think that if people were just more aware of it, they would absolutely be in favor of. My brother just had a very small on a beach wedding, so we had social distancing, but just with immediate family, and just talking to my immediate family, like a lot of people that are lifelong conservatives really like this idea, but have no information about it right now, and that's really just the main focal point is like, oh man, people are excited about this, or would be if they just knew more about it. How can we create content? How can we galvanize this idea in whatever way through the Slack forum, to just push out this idea. And, I don't want to be a defeatist like this won't happen in 2020, but even if it doesn't, I am, wanting to continue this idea of Unity 2020 regardless. I think it's just the direction that America needs to go. That I don't know if you guys are familiar with Sebastian Unger. He wrote a book called Tribe.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic, and he just talks about how, we're never going to get rid of people that lean conservative or liberal. That's an inevitability of the biology of humans. But we can get rid of red and blue. And the two-party system does not, or being, having conservative or liberal leanings does not, necessarily demand, this two-party system that I just think inherently creates divisiveness.
Right. So you'd love for all of this to happen as planned in 2020, and we begin our new way of doing politics starting then. You won't be so discouraged if it doesn't happen that you would fall out. You would continue to support the philosophy and movement in general.
Absolutely. And at least, that's what I hear from people that are more on the fence about it, that they just want more time, but they're not completely rejecting it. I have some, like my old history teacher friend who's, a little bit nervous about changing the Constitution. They're like, oh, 2 presidents, but you know what? It's a big job. The country's gotten a lot bigger since 1776. It could stand for 2 brains on the job. Yeah. Maybe just switch off every other day. One president takes the odd days, the other one takes the even. give them some rest out there.
It's not the most ridiculous idea I've heard this year, that's for sure. Jeff, maybe you could have expected this. I'm going to ask you the same question. What keeps you involved in the movement despite any possibility or even inevitability that it's not going to work out just as we all plan?
Yeah, I would probably pair a lot of what Joe just said. I guess part of my life philosophy is the worst feeling you can have each day is the feeling of helplessness. It's crazy. Well, everything in the U.S. is about politics right now. Everything has been politicized. Catching a virus or not catching a virus has been politicized somehow. So I'm not sure how that happened. But anyhow, I don't want life to be like that. And if life does have to be all about politics, then the American people deserve a choice about how those politics operate. That's what this country was founded on. I'll tie this back into Lawrence Lessig. He's very clear about the fact that the way the U.S. political machine, but more specifically the U.S. electoral system is operating is not the way anyone intended when this country was founded. It's a perversion of that, really. That's the way things are going right now. So in my mind, it's just an option of, do I want to kind of be a bystander to the crazy partisan politics? Really nonsensical politics that are going on in the U.S. right now. No, not if I can do something about it. I'm not going to be a bystander. So if Unity 2020 doesn't work out, then maybe Unity 2024 will.
Here's a bonus round for both of you. A Lessig Crenshaw ticket. Viable, reasonable, possible, or no?
Yes.
Yeah,
I'd vote for it.
Do it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, how dare you both? We bring you on to, we call it a debate, and everyone's very cordial, being able to discuss things openly and honestly. I guess that's what the movement is about, but maybe we could bring on a third party who's extremely disagreeable next time to really spice things up. I really appreciate both of you, in all seriousness, for coming on and talking about this, making yourselves vulnerable to just thinking out in the open, publicly, sharing this on the web, and just having a discussion that we're not going to get perfect, but we need to be thinking about this stuff. And you are 2 qualified citizens of the United States who ought to be thinking open-mindedly and loudly as you'd like to be about it. So I appreciate both of your time.
Thank you for having me on. It was great.
Yeah.
And I want to remind people to go to articlesofunity.org. That's the website where you can learn more about Unity 2020 and how you can become involved in it. And lastly, Joe is a musician. So you may have noticed he has probably a nicer mic than I do. You could probably hear him better than you can hear me right now. But and he wrote a song that we're using as part of giving you information bundles about the movement. And I'm going to guess that as we sign off right now, you're hearing the song. So this is Joe Hope. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for having me.
See you next time.
See ya.
Well, let me bend your ear for a moment. Just a spell. Come on.
Yo, Unity 2020. I know that sound funny, but it might just be the only way to get out of this dummy dual system. Republican, Democrat, one party dipped in, two colors on the same mission. To pit the populace against its own self, so nothing ever gets done. Like, man, what in the hell? Red or blue, who is you? It's all a distraction. A scam for your health, a scam for your wealth, a scam for attention spans on whatever it is that they want to sell you. Like this, I'm trying to tell you, GOP and DNC voters don't share the same cell, but they sure as hell living in the same damn prison. Yo, 3 hots in a cot, now they got Stockholm Syndrome, acting like red or blue be a part of their genome. America, what's going on? What's going on? It's a dire situation out there, really is. And every year it's getting worse, so the longer that we wait, the more there is to repair. Unity 2020, there's no time.
I just want to say a brief word about why we have chosen campfire as a metaphor and what it means to you and to us.
2020, it's a way up out of here. So go vote. Go vote. Yo, Unity 2020. No platform, just Pat sworn in with no affiliation with the lobbyist. Peeps for the populist, but not a populist. Got a liberal and conservative to tackle what the problem is. Yo, that sounds good to me. Sounds better than what is found on TV. Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, OAN. Oh my God, what happened to speech? Sound bites to ignite the bias of left and right. Don't inform, just affirm. That's today's zeitgeist. Christ.